This is Adam from modelofcontrol.com, and we're at Stay In Fest. I'm with Alex Reed from Seeming. Hi, Alex.
How's it going, Adam?
How are you?
I'm doing okay.
You have a new album, and it seems to have been an eternity since Soul, but not really, I don't think.
It's been about 3 years since the last record dropped, and one of the challenges in making this new record was that the last one, Soul, A Self-Banishment Ritual, which is this big, occultic, sprawling sort of think piece from 2017, it was so much effort to put together that I didn't want to fool myself into thinking that I had to outdo it and do more and better and make a bigger, longer album, but instead I just wanted to get in and do something punchy and immediate and that felt really, really real. And sometimes doing something that feels really immediate, sometimes that takes, a month, but sometimes it takes a year. And that's the paradox of it.
and it does feel... It feels, I think the single Go Small, frankly, kind of helps sum it up in that it seems to be a kind of about you rather than about looking at the wider world. Or at least that was how I felt it kind of came across.
I think so many of us were raised with this idea that you can change the world and that you can have a say in the direction that things are going, and at least in the UK and in the US over the last 5 years or so, a lot of people's assumptions like that have really been challenged. I mean, again and again, I just feel like the people with the money and the people with the guns, at least in this country, are the ones who are ultimately in control, and the people who put the most thought and the people who put the most compassion into their daily lives and the people who have the most creativity are completely irrelevant to the big picture. And so what do you do when there's no way to get a foothold, or at least there's no way for most people to get a foothold in having an effect on the world? Industrial music has been so concerned historically with talking about the great big issues, the epic landscape of the entire genre, and I love that, and I relate to that deeply, and I feel like it's kind of my genre inheritance. But also, what do we do when the only control that we have is over, the 5 square feet in front of us? When you say, okay, I feel like I'm going crazy. I feel like I'm locked down in the middle of a pandemic, and I can't fix a virus. I can't fix Brexit. I can't fix, fascism rising or something like that. But I can, I can bake bread, right? And industrial music and goth music are not traditionally seen as super domestic genres, right? There's almost a resistance against that, and I think that's kind of worth unpacking. It might be that we need to re-examine that. But at any rate, writing the album and writing a song like Go Small, which is this really kind of tight punk-influenced thing that alternates rapidly between the very intimate and the very epic, writing that felt like a good first step for reconciling how to exist in the world in 2020, because I think that the more that people just pretend that they can write songs about the same old topics of heartbreak or tyranny or whatever, the more that just seems disharmonious with the world. It seems out of step, and I got thinking, what does it really mean to make a 21st century record that responds to 21st century problems, both personally and politically?
I think there was something interesting that I've listened to it quite a bit over the weekend, and something that kind of struck me on about the fourth listen was that it goes from being kind of pessimistic and defeatist at points to suddenly almost being, I hate the word, I wouldn't like to use the word celebratory, but there's a kind of a hope by the time you get to a kind of reality's afraid of us and beyond that. And there's this, and it kind of almost like you're kind of willing yourself out of that funk of going, no, actually we can do something here. Was that kind of a deliberate sequencing that it was done like that?
It was. I wrote a lot of songs for this record. I ended up actually making a whole bonus record that gets packaged with the CD if you buy the 2 CD version, and if you want to wait for the digital version, that's coming out on Bandcamp Day next month. But the songs that I ended up putting onto this album, which is called The Birdwatcher's Guide to Atrocity, I thought pretty carefully about which songs constellated together and which songs wanted to go in what order. And I agree with you. There is something ultimately kind of hopeful about the record, which is kind of funny because, here I am saying, the earth is radiantly suicidal and saying, I'm going to make myself extinct. And the last song on the album, I'm talking about bashing my head in with a rock and things like that. And yet, I think that that's kind of exercising a lot of these demons. It's kind of saying, okay, these are the problems, but what does it mean when we start focusing on the people right around us? What does it mean when we cut out everyone in our lives that we don't need? When we cut out all of our racist uncles on Facebook, right? What does it mean when we really just say, okay, what are the essential parts that I can do a good job of fostering, and maybe what happens if I start acting as a beacon for other people around me? And when you start sort of, gosh, this is going to sound really, really hokey, but like when you start like living the way that you want to be living, when you start being your real self, people start noticing that, right? You have an energy to you, and people say, holy cow, that person seems to have their stuff together, whether or not you think you do or not. And that's how movements happen, right? That's how, whether it is the creation of a subculture, or the creation of a family, or the creation of a political revolution on any scale, small or large, it always begins with someone who actually, knows what they're doing and is making it happen. And, if we're sitting there making songs that are, criticizing the government, a government that we don't have a lot of power to take down, short of taking grossly illegal actions, which I don't not endorse, then we have to focus on what we can actually change. So it's very much a real world record, and yet I think it's still despite its real world trappings and despite its occasional bits of hope, I think it would translate really well to your sort of classic trad goth industrial audiences. And part of that is also just because, I mean, these are styles of music that I have deep histories and deep knowledges of. And when you look at the touchstone bands that people talk about, let's say you're talking about The Cure or Susie and the Banshees and Depeche Mode, these are bands that had real variety and that had real range, right? Susie was doing Peekaboo, Depeche Mode was doing But Not Tonight, The Cure was doing, In Between Days, and yet we act, or at least we've acted for the last 25 years, like the only thing you're allowed to do is cover Hanging Gardens, right? Or sing like, Stripped or something like that. I mean, so I think it's really important to widen the palette, and at this moment when we're trying to look for new possibilities, both personally and politically, and let's say we're talking about subcultural scenes, right? Let's say you're going to Whitby or something like that, and you're thinking, golly, are there fewer people here this year than last year? Where's all the new blood? Well, maybe to get new people involved, you have to have new kinds of expression, right? Maybe you need to be a little bit open, such that someone who might be having a good day is attracted to listening to your music or something like that. And I don't think that there's anything wrong with that, right? I don't think that. I mean, I guess I'm just confident enough in myself and who I am at this point that I don't feel like I have anything to lose by doing that, and that I'm not worried about being uncool,
I think that's entirely fair. I think, and that you say that about the kind of Whitby thing, there is that concern, and there is that concern that we have at the festivals, and and could it be that all this infighting that goes on between the people who organise these festivals probably doesn't help,
Yeah.
But also people policing the scene. Oh man, your band, the DJ's still playing bands that sound like the Sisters of Mercy 25 years on from when the Sisters were even relevant, and it's
right.
like, do we need more of that? I mean, really? I mean, and the post-punk boom at the moment is great. But there are bands taking it in new places, but there's an awful lot of them that are just playing the same old bass lines that Pete Hook did in 1982.
Yeah, and like I don't need everyone to be doing something different all the time. I mean, I literally listen to the Sisters of Mercy probably every week, but I do think it's important that we let a little bit of air into the room sometimes, because this has been less of a thing in the last few years, but you remember 8 or 9 years ago when like Witch House started happening, there was a lot of really reactionary gatekeeping in the goth scene, and not that Witch House is a going concern exactly in 2020, but I'm just using it as an example. There were a lot of people who were thinking, well, who are these new people? Why are they naming their band such weird things? It looks like it should sound like something I like, but it doesn't sound like anything I like, and why is there hip hop in my goth, right? And like that's just not a It's just not a productive way to be thinking about growing and changing as a person, an individual, a nation, a globe.
And as I recall being at Kinetic in 2011 and exactly those conversations being had about Witch House at the time. And, the festival, now I look back at it, had some great bands, but also had some pretty reductive aggro tech on the bill, because that was what the cool style was at the time, right? And we couldn't wait to get rid of it.
And if you want to be doing agrotech in 2020, fine, do it. But like, be doing it for the reasons that you want to be doing it. Be doing it in some way that has something to do with you or what you want to express, and not just because you're like, oh wow, I could really sound like Suicide Commando if I or something like that, you know. So.
Yeah. I mean, fair. I mean, and this brings me on to something that my wife and I were talking about, because the playlist you shared of like around the time of the Black Lives Matter really pushing into the public consciousness about the fact that, and we've discussed this before in previous interviews, about the fact that the influence of black music on industrial and goth is downplayed, whether we like it or not. It is downplayed, and that playlist you shared, we shared it. It went around a lot of people, and there was a lot of bands that we found. I found a couple of incredible Togolese metal bands that were in there, and other friends have shared. Like Kenyan power noise from Nairobi. There's a band called Duma who've blown up recently that are like two loons who seem to like grindcore and industrial noise at the same time, you know. And it is there, but we have to go and look for it.
Well, and especially because we tend to put on these airs of being objective about our taste, right? We say like, oh, I listen to, you know, the best stuff, and like, for yet some reason, why is it that 90% of the music that any of us listens to is all in English? Do we really think that like English, which is spoken by 12% of the world's population, somehow has like the market cornered on good music or something like that? You know, why is it that all the music made in the world happens to be made by people who are young and beautiful? That's a weird coincidence, right? Right. You get the idea, though. I mean, I just think that it's important on principle to be broadening your taste, and again, that's not everyone's individual duty. I'm not saying that anyone should feel guilty about listening to the stuff they listen to, but once you feel that reactionary push coming from within, once you feel that, but I don't wanna, or that, what are you doing here feeling, that's like that little inner fascist within, right? No one says that they're a fascist, almost nobody actually says that they're a fascist, right? But like all of us has somewhere between like 1 and 10% of that in us, and that's really, really important to, you know, interrogate and recognize, and when you look it in the face, you're gonna do a much better job of, you know, getting rid of it than when you pretend that it's not there, right?
Mm-hmm. And it's something, another thing I was saying to my wife earlier, because we've been both listening to the album, and I found it quite interesting that I couldn't find reference points this time. So Soul, there were wild influences and there were wild things in there. I'm like, oh my God, that sounds a bit like kind of chic and disco and whatever else. And this time I kind of, my first thought was, it sounds like Seeming. It sounds like, you know, it sounds like what I'd expect you to do to an extent, because it sounds like you. So you've got your sound. But what were the influences this time around?
Golly, you know, I really didn't think too much about individual influences as such. There are sometimes individual songs or individual moments that I might pick up on. Like I was listening to, you know, some like early 60s Motown music around the time that I was writing Celebration Song, the last track on the album. And so it's got this Phil Spector drum beat, this, you know, thum, 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 psh, thum, 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 psh, kind of a thing. And you know, there are other things that sort of found their way into the record. Anything from, you know, I listened to some Zola Jesus, I listened to the new Young Gods record, I listened to all kinds of stuff as I was making this. I listened to a lot of Barry Adamson, who, for whatever reason, just like never got his due in America, but I love his work. But yeah, I think you're right at this point. I have enough of a musical sensibility that that it's pretty hard to trace individual moments. So taking for example that first single, Go Small, that originally was written at the piano. It was originally done at half tempo of what it is now, so like 87 BPM. So da-dum, da-ba-dum, da-dum, da-dum, and it was kind of a groove-based thing. But then when I started talking to Sarah Hennies, who did some really, really good work on the album, and she's an experimental percussionist, we ended up recording most of the percussion for the record in her garage. And we just started playing around with the song, saying, okay, what happens if we play it at, you know, double time? What happens if we take all the cymbals and hi-hats out of it and just play it double time on tom-tom drums? Okay, that's great. Now what happens if we take the synths out and replace them with harps, you know? And so it's just these sort of what-if moments, right? And I have a kind of a gut-level sense of I like unlikely instruments, I like dulcimers, I like harps, I like, you know, real stand-up bass, I like giant giant drums that sound like clattering chains. I'm not so much into like lead synths these days. I'm not so much into pads these days. But I am into humming, and I am into choirs and things like that. So just kind of getting a sense of what feels good. That is inspired by, just omnivorous taste and just thinking about music for a long time, and maybe thinking, all right, I want this to sound a little bit classic, so instead of using a synthesizer pad, I'm going to use a Mellotron flute sound or something like that. That was something that I did a lot on the Soul record or something like that to give it sort of a 70s vibe. But yeah, at this point, I have a pretty good set of instincts that the songs kind of lead me in their own way, such that every time I make a new song, I feel like I have to reinvent music. I feel like I have to rebuild it from the ground up and say, all right, what's my instrumental palette here? And gosh, wouldn't this just be easier if I were a folk singer with a guitar, Wouldn't this just be easier if I were just like, a techno producer who used the same 909 sounds on every dance song? But no, it's my weird curse is that I'm like, well, I have to use, some new instrument or some different sound than I've ever used before, and so we wind up with trombones all over this album.
Which reminds me, what was the element at the end of The Fates, the first song on the album?
Oh.
There's a really fascinating bit in there with a female vocal that reminded me of something, but I could not nail what it is.
That's kulning, as the I believe the Norwegians call it. It's a Scandinavian vocal practice, usually sung for herding cows in a field, actually.
Huh.
So if you go and you find like videos on YouTube of like, see this Scandinavian witch calling cows from across the prairie, that's the kind of sound that she'll be making.
Right. Okay. Okay, fair enough. I asked. So there is one last question about this album before I move on to other things. But but what's with the title? Because that's really bugged us, and we're like, what's the significance of it?
I have no idea. Is the short answer. These are things like the title or things like certain lines across the album are these phrases that show up on a gut level for me. They feel like they're just channeled in from nowhere, and I write these things down kind of all the time. Like I've got a giant notebook at home, which is about 200 pages just full of me writing whatever random stuff comes to mind, and most of it's absolute garbage, right? You'll open up a page and it'll say something like the ape in the apiary, which is, not useful for anything, right? But eventually, you go through it and you're like, all right, I'm going to find, the one line that I find really, really compelling out of these 20 pages or something like that. And you wind up with like, what is it? So be the red hot miracle among cosmonauts, right? That shows up in the last song. Again, no idea what this line means. But what I do trust is that my gut or the universe or whatever it is going to be channeling something that's meaningful, and that when my aesthetics say, yes, I like that thing, it'll have something to do on a subconscious level, on a primordial level with my other aesthetics. And so, let's say we're just taking that line right there, the red hot miracle among cosmonauts. You're thinking about something crashing to the ground at this point. That was a line that I had written a few years ago when I didn't yet know that the album was going to have anything to do with bird watching, and when I didn't yet know that the cover of it was going to be Icarus, right? And when I chose Icarus for the cover, I hadn't thought about the fact that he falls because he melts after coming too close to the sun, and that my last record was all about the sun, right? So these are all these things that happen on a gut level for me, and a lot of the time I don't realize what I've done until after the fact. And these connections are there if anybody wants to make them, or if they just want to stand on their own as these strange phrases like The Birdwatcher's Guide to Atrocity. That's fine. I mean, I could analyze that title for you. I could certainly talk to you about how I'm fascinated by nature and animal rights and decentering the human. And so what does it mean when you have a birdwatcher watching Atrocity? Does that suggest that there's some crisis of nature, that the birds are all dying? Or is it that, we're trying to align ourselves with some animal who's watching, humans go down the drain or something like that? At any rate, I wanted to show both that it was intimate, so quiet, bird watching. I wanted to show that it was epic, Atrocity, and I wanted to decenter myself and humanity in general. So that's kind of the best answer that I can give you on that title.
Okay, that's fine. I mean, and where do you see your kind of, because obviously you're kind of, as seeming, it's now been 3 albums, various other tracks as well here and there, the World Burners EP in between, and obviously you don't play live a great deal. Was that always a thing, that was live performance something that you wanted to do, or is it something you do because you kind of do it when you have the time rather than, and you'd rather be recording?
I mean, for one, I'm busy. If someone wants to book us to play live, yeah, hit me up, email me. We will make it happen, or at least under a pandemic, we'll try to make it happen. I like playing live just fine. Booking a tour is difficult, and this is not a complaint, but I will say that a lot of the people who get most into our music are people who spend time listening closely to it. They're people who spend headphone hours with our music, and they relate to it in a way that might not necessarily be the same set of reasons why people go out to a club or go out to see a live show at a festival or something like that. I remember when I was in my old band, which was an act called Thou Shalt Not, I would get frustrated, and I shouldn't have been frustrated by this, but I was. I'd get frustrated by the fact that people would come out to shows and they would just want to stand in the back and hold their beer and maybe dance when a good beat came along. And I was up there thinking, no, you're not recognizing how much effort I put into the deeper meaning behind this song. And now I understand, that most people, when they go out, they want to have a good time. They want that physical immediacy of a live show that's going to rip their scalp off with loudness or something like that. And we can do that. Like, we do this now, and this is part of our presentation, especially around like the World Burners kind of material and things like that. But B, per the issue of going small, and per the idea of anarchistically building your own little community, I would rather play to people who want to hear our music and who are going to appreciate it on its own terms than play to someone who says, well, this is fine, but it doesn't sound enough like Wumpscut. Because I'm never going to please those people. I'm just never going to please those people, and why should I try to be something that I'm not? And so playing live is great. Again, we would love to be playing everywhere live. We would love to go on tour, but for timing and money and I think maybe also language reasons, we tend to have a fan base that's I don't know, more online.
Mm-hmm. Hopefully you will make it to Infest one year. And
I would love to come over and play. I would love to do a European tour. We played over in Malmo a year or two ago at Electric Christmas in Sweden, and that was great. We played with Hiphop, Berserk, and Daniel Meyer and things like that. So yeah, I would love to make something like that happen. If any promoters are listening, by all means, bring us over. We'll make it worth your while.
We have been requesting. We have been requesting that it happens.
Great.
Yeah. But yeah, I think I kind of, it's one of those. Your music is as you say, it's a home listening thing a lot of the time, and I find that sometimes I do need to go away and sit down and listen to your music, and I've listened to Birdwatchers a lot over the last few days, because it's been one of those where I listened to it once and I was like, hang on a minute, I need to go back and listen to that. So I just went and listened to the whole thing again, and I had a journey across town that took my a train journey that took me 45 minutes. Which was perfect because I had noise-cancelling headphones and could listen to the whole thing and get myself into the detail. And it felt that suddenly I felt after 3 listens, hang on a minute, I get this now. And I started to see where we were going, and now I'm picking out the detail. And it's I like albums like that. I like being rewarded by listening to another one this year that's done that has been the new Neubauten album, which is one of those albums that's got some exquisite detail in it. And if you just deride it as, it's a quiet Neubauten album, you're missing half the fun.
Oh yeah, every Neubauten album is like that. I mean, it just asks you to listen more and think a little bit more. And I'm reminded a little bit of what it was like, and here I'm going to sound old, but I remember what it was like when I was 11, 12 years old, and I'd go and I'd spend my only $10 on a tape, And, because I only had 15 tapes and because I had just spent my last $10 on it, I was going to listen to that thing until I learned to like it, right? Whether it grabbed me offhand or not, right? So if I didn't like something, I'd be like, oh, well, I guess I'm failing this album. I guess I need to do a better job of appreciating it or something like that. And that doesn't mean that we should like garbage, right? I mean, it doesn't mean that we should like things that aren't good. But I do think that the economy of attention in the 21st century is a pretty toxic marketplace. I think that the idea that if we don't have our attention grabbed by a piece of music on Spotify in the first 10 seconds that we're going to skip on, I think people are going to be missing a lot of really, really good things. And I think that over time they're going to feel a little undernourished.
I think there's something interesting that's happened that we've noticed while lockdown has been going on, because we've resumed, a couple of my friends have resumed DJing, and we're live streaming sets and whatever else, and they've become quite popular. But what's really interesting is that people are paying more attention to the music that's played. So with the chat feed on the side, you can get immediacy from people going, oh, hello, what's this? I really like this. And you
great.
can put a link right there and you can say, this is this. And there were people going, oh, this is just added to my to-buy list. Next Bandcamp day, I've got 10 albums I'm going to go and buy. And we put my partner in crime on Friday night played End Studies, and I played Go Small the previous time. And we had people asking both times going, hey, what's this? And it was one of a few fans where we had this. And we're like, this is what we're doing. We are now we're in a better position as DJs to be able to promote music than we ever were before, and it's probably one of the few good things out of this, in that people are paying closer attention, and it means that people you are hearing new music, and maybe in a club you don't because you've had a few beers and that song's all right, but you're not going to remember it in the morning.
Right.
And I think that's a positive. I think it gives us a chance. I mean, it's not going to last forever, and hopefully at some point we'll be back in venues and we'll be back seeing live music. But things have changed, and I don't know quite what that means for the future. But not to put it down on it, we don't know what the future holds at the moment, and that's kind of one of the weird things about this year, I think.
Yeah, well, and I think that taking it optimistically, when nobody knows what the future holds, that means that you and I have just as much a chance of having a stake and having an influence on what the future holds as anybody else. When everyone's caught off guard by this, what's the line from Game of Thrones? Chaos is a ladder. So you could say, all right, fine. Even after everybody comes back into public, I'm going to keep doing this. I'm going to keep doing this online DJing thing, and maybe that could be something that people have learned to like. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, maybe. I mean, it's something that I'm going to keep going for now because I'm enjoying doing it again. I've actually got a love of doing it, maybe for the first time in 10 years.
That's great.
And I think I don't make music. I'm in the peanut gallery, firing shots at people who write it. But I think it's an important conversation that needs to be had between both sides, because I think we can promote music, but we also have the power to do the other side, to be negative about it. And I think right now, many of us are knocking down the negativity because it's not really the time to do it.
Yeah.
So I think we're in a good place. But anyway, thanks for doing this today.
Of course, thank you. I enjoyed this.
Yeah, I've always found you a fascinating interviewee anyway, because because you have a lot to say and you have a lot of interesting things to say. Sometimes I've interviewed other people where it's just like you're kind of teasing answers out and you get like two line answers and you're like, great.
I remember when I was doing interviews for the book I wrote on industrial music, and I was interviewing probably like 75 people for this book, and there were some who instantly when I met them, I'm like, oh, holy cow, this is going to be great. Like I remember talking to Patrick from Front 242, and at least in my encounter with him, he was just as intelligent and gracious and thoughtful and interesting as you could possibly hope for. And then sometimes you meet someone and you're like, oh, golly, I love your music, but whew, I am working to get you to say anything. Or on the other hand, you get people who blab and they think that everything that they have to say is positively ingenious, and you're like, I've definitely heard these things before, or these things are not, so ingenious. Like, I'm not gonna name names, but one of my favorite bands in the entire world, the lead singer wrote a gigantic brick of a autobiography, being like, yes, here are my memoirs. And I'm like, okay, great, I'll read this whole thing. I read the whole thing. I'm like, oh, geez, I'm just gonna go back and listen to your records right now and not worry too much about your inner life, because hearing the stories behind these songs didn't make any of them better. So
I had the same about Patrick from 242 because I interviewed him when they played Infest in 2008.
Yeah.
One of the
Great
first
guy.
interviews I ever did, and he was fascinating because
Yeah.
there was so much to say, but also that he was they were almost like scientists. It was kind of a scientific approach to how they experimented with music, and they kind of hypothesized about it. And you're like, this is like no one else I've ever heard describe music in this way.
And it's, at least I had the experience with him of having a long, fun conversation because I was able to sort of get on his page. One of the things that I do is I collect old zines. I collect old magazines and like publications and things like that. I've got hundreds and hundreds of them. And if I go back and if I read old interviews with Front 242 from, let's say, the 1980s, especially the ones in the more mainstream publications, the interviewers have no idea how to talk to this band, and it's so funny and frustrating at the same time to see this impasse where they're asking them, like, what are your influences? And they're like, well, we really like Powers of Two. That's a good influence, right? And like they can't, find any common ground to talk about this when I know that what they're trying to say is really, really fascinating, but they're just not finding the right language for it.
My view on this is that if I'm interviewing bands, I will only interview bands that I'm actually interested in, and I feel that I want to ask them something.
Yeah.
So no boilerplate questions, and always go for, actually listen to what they've done. If it's new, talk about, but also understand what the hell they're trying to do, because otherwise you just you get the boilerplate questions and it's awful and it's cringeworthy reading it.
Yeah. I'm always happy to answer questions about a song. If you're like, okay, talk to me about this one, or talk to me about why you made this choice. That's the kind of question that I find is really, really productive and stimulating and can get at some of those bigger issues. Whereas if someone's like, describe your music for someone who's never heard it before, I'm like, isn't that your job, journalist? Or like, isn't that Spotify's job? Can't they just go click on it? Like, golly. So yeah.
One last question, actually.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on this because there's been a really fascinating debate on Jason from Actors' Facebook the other week about the whole business of Spotify and Bandcamp, and he was kind of going, well, I see Spotify as an excellent tool for advertising that you're there, not necessarily making money, but actually, giving you a presence and giving you an ability to reach an audience that you could never otherwise reach. And obviously there are other musicians that are like, no, Spotify's garbage and I'm never touching it. And it's like, well, we've got to get to music somehow, right? And this is the new reality.
Yeah, there are a lot of ways to get music, and so I will say, there's no like ethical consumption under capitalism and blah 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 blah. So when you listen to somebody's music, somebody's getting ripped off. But if you buy a piece of vinyl, that's also terrible for the environment, right? I happen to like Bandcamp, but I also recognize that there's no like good software for playing MP3s anymore because iTunes got too bloated and nobody uses Winamp, right? Bandcamp does allow artists to set their own prices. It does allow people to focus on albums, and it does allow the users to own the music such that if some tiff happens, at some higher up copyright related level, it doesn't suddenly disappear. For those reasons, I like it, but I also recognize that the real reason why I might like Bandcamp probably has something to do with the fact that I'm a collector of music and that I was born when I was born, right? And I don't really ask or expect a 16-year-old this year to see the wonder that is Bandcamp, right? I mean, if they've grown up with a streaming world, then they're going to want to have the easiest, fastest streaming with the biggest catalog, and if they're thinking in terms of playlists and albums, I'm not going to say you're wrong, right? I'm going to say, fine, here's our music. If you would like to click on the album, listen, you might get a little bit more out of it that way, but yeah, it's fine. It's an advertising platform. I mean, I think that they underpay their artists. I think that I have problems with the ethics by which they perceive Spotify as their product rather than music as their product. But of all the battles that I'm going to fight, I just don't have the time to really wage that one per se. Like, there's a lot of things in the world that again, going back to like the Wumpscut fan who I'm not going to please, I try to focus on the things that I am going to get some kind of positive energy out of. So yeah, I put the music up on Spotify, the label helps me promote it up there. I say, hey, you can go check it out, go listen to it. I discover music sometimes on Spotify. I also put it up on Bandcamp. I make more money from Bandcamp, but I get more opportunities from Spotify as far as like soundtrack appearances and things like that go, it's really a wash, and money's not really why I'm doing this anyway. If money were why I was doing this, I'd be making a different kind of music. I certainly wouldn't be calling albums things like The Birdwatcher's Guide to Atrocity. So it is what it is. But as someone who drives a car, that's running on toxic fumes and all this stuff, there's just only so many places where I can put my energies for making myself happy or for making the world better. I talk about this in the song Beatlock, actually. What is it? In a body fed with slaughtered chickens, clothing made by labor victims, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Laughing at the thought that there's a way out of the system. So I do what I can. I get music where I can. I encourage people to get music where they can. And the last thing I'll say about that is that I really, really do enjoy old-fashioned crate digging. Again, this speaks to probably when I was born. But more to the point, I enjoy finding and listening to music and finding and reading books and encountering media that nobody has put in front of me. I like it when I'm not being advertised to, and I like it when the discovery is mine and when it feels something like a secret, so that I can listen to it as it is rather than as a product competing for my attention. And I really, really value that.